Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to be talking about the consumer recovery and resilience in the market today. So I'm going to run you through some of the key trends impacting consumers in the marketplace. My name is Richard. I'm from Cimigo. We're a market research firm. We've been here 20 years. Essentially, we help clients make better choices, both commercial and marketing choices. Everything I'm showing you today is on our website. You can download it, so don't be too concerned about anything there. I'm going to start off by looking at a quick review on where Vietnam is, what's the progress in 2021, just with some key numbers to put the country's economic development and social progress in mind. So 98 million people, an economy that grew at just over 2.5% last year. Reaching 364 billion. So that's nearly a per capita income of 3,600, 3,700. We can see some interesting developments in the internet economy, which I'll be talking about, now valued at 21 billion, or nearly 6% of the overall economy. Retail was tough. Retail sales of goods and services was tough last year. It declined 8.5% overall. I'll talk more in detail about that. Lots of people online, no surprise, when we look at Facebook and Zalo from Vinagame. Smartphone penetration is ubiquitous at 97%. About 1.3 billion spent on advertising. New cars sold a day, just over 1,000, slight decline on last year. Huge decline in apartments. A lot of that's to do with available stock, as well as financial pressure on the economy. And we have a banked marketplace of 70% banked, according to the State Bank of adults. So that's kind of, where we're at. Some of this is reiterated. So 2.5%, 2.58% growth, nearly 5% industrial production growth. Retail sales we've talked about. You'll see conflicting numbers on retail sales. I'm including sales and services, taking into account hospitality and tourism in these numbers, which is probably why you're seeing a bigger drop than you see on maybe other economists talk to you in numbers. Exports up 19%, but imports up 27%, so a very small trade surplus there. The PMI index was at 52.5 at the end of the year, which is suggesting growth, low inflation levels. Foreign direct investment was down just 2%. This is dispersed. So if you're thinking of this as odd numbers, it's dispersed as opposed to promised. And we're looking at a forecast economic growth this year of 6.5%. Let's have a look at that economic output, what's happening. This is the PMI data up until the end of February. So anything above 50, where the green line is showing expected growth and momentum from the marketplace. We run this survey in Vietnam. Manufacturers are having certainly issues in shipping and access to containers and the costs. And still, not all migrant workers who live in the provinces have returned to work because of COVID fears. So there are some restrictions hampering their operations in terms of available labor. I talk about this most years, but Vietnam remains the most trade interconnected nation on earth. It's at 184%. That's imports plus exports as a percentage of GDP. And it's up from 2020, which was 154. A lot of the trade deals over time are a big part of that. It's also why you'll find Vietnam very silent on geopolitical issues, maintaining good relationships with as many people as possible very well. Huge manufacturing hub. It's a significant part of our economic output, obviously, and our export growth. Part of the reasons for that is our minimum wage at its highest level in Saigon is $191 today, minimum wage, versus $308 in the Pearl River Delta or Guangzhou area. So we do attract a lot of manufacturers. We're the fourth largest economy in Southeast Asia, and we were last year also, and we're the most interconnected trading nation globally. Pressures on the marketplace, shipping costs. March 2020, a 40-foot container would cost $2,000 to the US. It's now up near $10,000. This is a worldwide index, but it's very indicative of prices that Vietnamese exporters are coming across. So it's a huge increase in shipping costs. That may be okay if you have very high value items. If you have low value items like furniture, it puts a lot more pressure on the business. COVID, I won't go on about it because we're all sick of it, but I just want to highlight the differences between 2020 and 2021. So the 21 hit was much harder on the Vietnamese economy. We estimate just over 4 million job losses and household income dropping 38% in 2021, which is a huge drop and much higher than we saw in 2020 with the extended lockdowns that we had. So consumers took a hit and that certainly led to some changes in the way they spend their money. Things are much better now. We'll be talking about that as we go through the presentation. But there are some pressures again, fuel prices, which I'm sure you read about. You know, in October, it was 22,000 dong a litre. It's now up close to 30,000 dong a litre. There are talks about reducing taxes on fuel prices, but let's see how that materializes. What's the pressure from the invasion of Ukraine? Obviously, there's supply chain disruptions, increased costs for certain items such as grain, particularly fertilizer and fuel. That's likely to push Vietnam's inflation up much higher than we've seen in recent years to 4.5% this year. Tourism is an issue. You know, the borders have been closed, but when tourism returns, we wouldn't expect too many Russian tourists, not because of restrictions, but because of their available income and access to US dollars. It's not too big. I mean, in 2019, there were 650,000 inbound Russian tourists. It was the sixth largest. The Chinese travel restrictions will have a far greater impact on tourism when people do start traveling again because of the zero COVID policy and the travel restrictions that involves in China. So in comparison, China had nearly 6 million tourists inbound into Vietnam in 2019, all pre-COVID, versus Russia's at 650,000. So you can imagine the impact would be far greater there. Trade with Russia and Vietnam is limited. It's 1.1% of all trade, international trade from Vietnam, and direct foreign investment is also limited. So really the major issue is supply chain disruptions and increased costs. For the consumer, confidence is absolutely key. Consumer confidence is now 30% above what we saw at its all-time low in September when we were in the middle of lockdown, but it still remains 30% lower than 2019. Confidence is rebounding. Why? Because of people are vaccinated, workplace measures, homework flexibility, kids are back at school, and people can travel domestically again. But there still remains some income security if the lockdown's repeated. A lot of migrant workers had a very bad experience last year, their inability to earn any money, and also their inability to travel home to the safety of their rural province, and the medical costs involved if people do encounter COVID. I'll be quick on this because this is very historic, but these are the categories that shrank in 2020 and 21. Outbound travel, of course, entertainment, eating out, a lot of retail services. Some big ticket items also suffered as people held on to what little money was available to them. Some areas accelerated their growth during the 2020 and 2021. The ones above the arrow are ones that we believe will endure, will carry on. And the ones below the arrow we believe were temporary and a reaction to COVID. So online shopping, less up-trading and premiumization of consumer goods brands, logistics and ride-hailing, gaming, online content, online education, and so on. This is retail sales in Vietnam. I've just indexed a monthly level, which of course is hiding some seasonal impact. But I've just indexed September 19, way before COVID, at 100, and just looked at where retail sales of goods and services are. Overall, they're really back. You can see some fluctuations and some quite huge drops during the lockdown. But as of February data, we can see that we're really back at a monthly level that we were experienced back in 2019. And in fact, when we look at the detail between goods versus services, services being tourism and hospitality, spas, etc., we can see that actually we've really done quite well in terms of retail goods being back at a 2019 level. Services have a long way to go, but we do expect them to edge back, and we expect by September we'll see retail services back where they were in 2019, and then return to their growth trajectory. So GDP 6.5% is the forecast for this year. You know what it was last year. That was the lowest level since 1986, so it was quite a significant hit despite it being growth. Less than we saw in 2020, and a sharp contrast to what we experienced in 2019. So second half of 2022, certainly from a consumer's perspective, we believe growth will be back on for retail sales, whether that's goods and services a little bit later in September, getting back into a growth spectrum. The consuming class, so this is people who earn more than 10 million Vietnam dong any given month as a household, not an individual, is at 44% of all households. There's 27, nearly 28 million households. 44% of them fall into that class that can really go out, walk into a mini mart and buy some branded product that is beyond essentials. So that's putting it in perspective in terms of how many households there are. I'm going to ask you a quick poll question now. I'm going to try to, if I can find the right question. Yes. Help me out. Wake yourselves up after lunch. The question is, how many millionaires do you think Vietnam has today? So you've got some options. Fill it in, and we'll then look at the data and see how you've fared. Hopefully you can see the results on screen. Take a guess. If you're not sure, a guess is fine. There's no prizes. There's no punishments. Okay.
Richard, we're referencing USD millionaires, right?
We are referencing USD millionaires, yes. Not Vietnam dong millionaires.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll there in the interest of speed. So if you haven't made your mind up, sorry. And I'm just sharing the results with you. So most people are saying more than 90,000 at 33%, and then we've got a big chunk of you saying somewhere between 10 and 30,000 at 31%. Let's have a look at the actual answer. So remember your answer and the assumptions that you make about Vietnam, and then let's see really what the market has to tell us. Millionaires. In 2021, there were 69,000 millionaires. That's up 218% over 2017. So ultra high net worth individuals, 1,200, 6 billionaires. And then the real world for most of us, households earning over $1,000 per month. It's 1.5 million, which puts the market in perspective and maybe takes away some of the hype that we all experience and read about. And then households earning somewhere between 500 and just under $1,000 is nearly, well, it's 9.5 million households. So those two groups, they're making up 11 million households of people with really a significant income level, and up somewhere between 21 and 24% over 4 years. So that's worth noting. The real rich have got a lot richer, or there's more of them. The other area of interest is the amount of inbound remittances, mostly from overseas Vietnamese, mostly from the US, but also Australia. That's up from 15 million to 18 billion. So we see some middle class acceleration. It's been hampered a little bit in the last 2 years, as you might expect. The other impact on the wealth for households is migration, so urbanization, moving to higher paid work in urban areas. and lower birth rates, meaning smaller households, which tend to be slightly wealthier and more disposable income. On that point, let's have a quick look on the demographics. Oh, I have one more poll for you. Let me see if I can pull that up. Just need to, I think I've just ended it.
Is it
Sorry.
this one?
Just bear with me 1 second. Okay. Oh no, I've ended the poll before it started. Okay, I'll relaunch the poll. There we go. Okay. So I'm asking you, which is the third largest city in population in Vietnam after after Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi? So again, take a note of your own perception, and then we'll look at the reality. So a lot of people saying Da Nang so far on my screen. Okay, make your choice now. If you don't know, make a guess. I'm about to end the poll. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm ending the poll now. I'm going to share results back to you. So you can see that Da Nang at 35% of you is what most of you said, followed by Haiphong at 24%. So I'm going to stop sharing now and actually show you the answers. It's actually Tuduk City. So the government reorganized Ho Chi Minh City and created a second city where I currently live. I used to live in District 2, Ho Chi Minh City. I now live in Tuduk City, which after Ho Chi Minh, then Hanoi, is now Vietnam's third largest city in terms of urban population. Da Nang actually is quite small, at under 1 million, as is Haiphong, and Can Tho is even smaller for those of you that selected Can Tho. This is the urban population. You will read a lot of press that Ho Chi Minh City has 11 million people. It does, as a province. Actually, it has about 10 million people as a province, and about 1 million come into the province every day to work from surrounding provinces. But the urban population, which is where most consumer goods companies will get most of their sales, is just under 6 million. And then Tuduk City is 1.1 million. So it's worth bearing in mind. This data is based on the 2019 census by the General Statistics Office. The other shifts that are happening, we have 2 areas that are in decline in terms of their population growth. That is 0 to 14-year-olds. So a lot of you out there still think Vietnam is a very young country. Its average age is about 34. You also think of it as a very rural country. It is. 66% of the population is rural. However, they're both in decline. The biggest growth is in the over 50s and in urban areas, primarily due to migration. And that's worth remembering because the longer term opportunities and the impact that might have on some of your companies that you invest in. So here, you know, this is where we are today, 64% rural, 36% urban. By 2036, urban will be up to 45%. And at the same time, we're seeing household sizes getting smaller. The rural population started going into decline in 2017 and will continue to do so for as long as I can see or I'll be alive. So it provides challenges, of course, but it also creates high efficiency for the distribution of products and convenience for consumers and the types of stores and retail environments they visit. The other great thing about Vietnam's economy is most women work. So 88% of women between the ages of 20 and 64 work. And for those of you okay with demographics, what that means is there's a very low dependency of non-workers in a household to workers. And that really gives GDP a huge shift. So most men work and most women work. And, you know, if I compare that to India, it's about 15%. If I compare it to Indonesia, it's about 19% of women work. So it has a huge positive impact on the economy, certainly. Maybe socially, there are different factors at play. So more women work in Vietnam than anywhere else in the region. It's a huge demographic dividend. That is the biggest demographic dividend that Vietnam enjoys. And it's really going to help propel Vietnam over the next 10 years. Age profile. So, you know, 0 to 14-year-olds in 2021, 22%, 2036, 17%. So it's Changes in age groups don't happen too rapidly, but they certainly happen over the longer term. And if we look at the over 50s, it's going from 24% to 36%. That is a big shift. We're also seeing far lower birth rates, so the birth rate continues to decline. And one of the quite scary things is the birth rate in major cities, in urban areas, is much lower than everywhere else in the country. And given the rate of urbanization that Vietnam is experiencing, that's going to become tougher, and the population will fall below the sustainable level. Has fallen below and will continue to do so. So this is just breaking down the over 50s. The 50 to 59-year-old group, this is me, going from 12 to 14%, and you can see the growth in the older segments of the population by 10-year bands there. So it's the fastest growing part of the population. It creates lots of opportunities that are really leveraged by the financial community and should be leveraged a lot more by consumer brands going forward. High disposable income, most of them are empty nesters. Their kids have their own income and their own lives. They've got assets because they're sitting on home ownership. They create a huge opportunity. And one generally in my field of marketing that marketers never really seem to understand or want to talk to, because marketing departments and their agencies are full of 22-year-olds. Okay, so a staggering drop in the birth rate, an aging population that's really going to take hold in the next decade, and elderly dependence, which is going to become a key challenge in the 2040s. Great at the middle class and upper class. It presents a huge opportunity, quite challenging for the lower end of the economic spectrum, because these elderly dependents will need looking after. Just very briefly, I mean, 13% of seniors, or the silver market, 13% of their income is spent on healthcare. And you can see just some of the common disorders and how they change with age. Isn't that a great future to look forward to? If you want to know more about this generation, go to our website. There's a free report. You can download it. I'm going to move on to shopper dynamics. One of the biggest changes, of course, is the rise of modern format. A modern format, basically, select yourself inside an air-conditioned building, go to a cash register. That's our definition of a modern format. Bakwasan is the biggest expander over the last year in the modern format. It's a mini market format. There's a picture. 2,150 outlets as of a couple of days ago. They're owned by Mobile World, which is Taiyue Didong, who have, across a number of different brands, nearly 5,000 stores, so a very experienced retailer. And for marketers, it provides a great opportunity in distribution by bypassing, to some extent, the traditional trade. Let's talk about the traditional trade. But first of all, another quick poll just to keep you awake. And the question is, which is the fastest growing retail sales channel? So for retail goods, what's the fastest growing channel in 2021 over 2020? Okay. Much quicker response this time and a much clearer answer this time. I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to share back the results. 89% of you are suggesting online shopping, and 89% of you are 100% correct. Yeah, it's a channel that's grown just over 60% over last year. It's the little green bar. As a proportion of overall sales, it represents 8% today, but it's a 60% growth over time. As a proportion of sales, modern trade has moved from 22% to 24%. However, its growth in absolute terms is just 7% in absolute sales terms. And the traditional trade, wet markets, mum and pop shops and the like, is moved from 73 to 68. Let's not forget, it still dominates, but it did not grow last year. It fell in absolute terms by 11-12%. I forget the exact number now, but roughly that. But of course, still extremely important. And there's 1.4 million traditional trade stores across the country. In terms of number of outlets of modern trade likeness, we've gone from 7,089 to 8,586 as of 2 days ago. That's a 20% increase. One brand accounts for 61% of that increase. One brand. And in fact, I'm taking a sub-brand. If I took the mother company, I'm not sure what that number would be, but I could run it, I guess. So Bacroissant has been the major driver of the expansion of modern trade outlets, and that's their mini market format. We believe online shopping, and we've been saying this for 3 years now, is going to surpass modern trade as its contribution to overall sales by 28. Modern trade moved very slowly. In 2005, it was already at 15% of retail goods sales. And last year, it's at 24%. Online commerce is moving much, much quicker. And I'm going to show you a little bit later in the presentation that it's not just urban areas, it's also rural areas. Bacroissant, by the way, is also doing a very good job at moving beyond the cities we talked about earlier into many smaller provincial towns, which have a large rural catchment area. So big shifts, not just in the cities, but also in the nature of and ways that people shop, particularly for grocery across the country. So one of the biggest shifts to take note of is both e-commerce and modern trade is really making inroads into provincial towns and rural households. The digital economy is also helping the idea of the experience economy growing rapidly as well, and has been for the last 4 years. This is just looking at online shopping. It's a study that we did amongst the digital generation, so it is skewed to the youth, but we did it across urban and rural Vietnam. And I really just want to highlight the strata. So 54% had shopped online in the last month in urban areas and 43% in rural areas. So rural very much catching up with their urban compatriots. Shopee, by far the largest platform, closely followed by Lazada. Facebook, of course, is a multitude of small stores and online sellers and social sellers at 32%, and then Tiki. That's based on 1,500 consumers, both urban and rural. Okay. How do we reach Vietnamese consumers? On their screen. So ironically, it went down by about 7 minutes in 2021 over 2020. However, there's still a lot of screen time, whether that's on social, using any device, or whether it's TV, video more commonly, being 2 hours and 46 minutes. So that's where people are spending their time. The internet economy I alluded to earlier is now at 6% of GDP. 62% of that is going in online shopping, 19% in ads and media and gaming, and 11% in ride hailing. But you can see the growth. Look at 2015 in the bottom in gray. It was at 3 billion. It's now at 21 billion. So this is the area that's having the biggest change in the consumer landscape. And it shifts people's priorities. It makes experiences much more important than ownership. And it shifts how people spend their time and interact with some of the companies that you invest in. I'm showing you one chart when we look at people's media behavior. I have, and you can download it on our website. I have the same charts. I am talking to the digital generation, so it's a little bit skewed to youth, hence the future. Even if I ask them where they get their news, it's a very similar chart, and it's really bringing the mindset of the urban consumer and the Vietnamese consumer much closer together, because most of their news, most of their interactions are coming from Facebook, YouTube, and Zalo. Zalo is the instant messaging app from Vina Game, for those of you aren't in here. TikTok's really headed up the charts in the last year, and is the fourth major player. But the similarities between urban and rural areas now are staggering. And it's staggering what that does to the consumer's worldview, because their worldview, their attitudes, their values today amongst this generation are very, very, very similar. So a lot of the regional differences that we were used to seeing historically over the last 20 years that I've been here are slowly disintegrating, and it's becoming much more of one nation in terms of its attitudes and values, particularly amongst the youth. I want to talk about financial inclusion. 70% of adults are banked. I see a lot of hype about fintech launching products to serve the unbanked. I don't know who they are because 70% of adults are banked. There's not such a huge opportunity in the unbanked. Most are banked. I'm pulling some data from a recent study we did looking at 2,000 consumers nationally, urban and rural, really looking at financial services. I am hugely summarizing a rather large study. One thing we look at is the brand power that different banking brands have. And this takes into account not only what consumers do, but how they feel towards that bank. Think of it as who's got the best momentum amongst consumers. Nothing to do with assets, liabilities, non-performing loans, none of that. It's consumer perspective, which are likely to grow more strongly. And that's a rank order from 1 to 10. So Vietcombank, MB Bank, BIDV Bank. And I'm not going to read out all the bank names, but that's the top 10 from a consumer perspective. You know, and there's a huge opportunity for those banks and probably those that fall from number 11 to 20 in that, you know, this is an odd chart, but it's just showing the relationship between different products. So a lot of people have a payment account or a salary account. They're using mobile banking and web banking. Another group of people have credit cards, saving books, debit cards. And then we have the other group where most banks make their money in the loan territory, acting as bank assurance channels, secured loans, unsecured loans, and so forth. And that third group, there is a lot of room for development because the vast part of the market is in group 1 and group 2, and who are not currently using services where the banks would make most of their money. I'm deliberately not showing you all the numbers attached to that chart because we charge clients for that. So I think they'd be a bit upset if I shared the numbers. A fintech battleground. So there's a lot of press on fintech and related areas to fintech, also insurance tech and property tech. This chart is from Tech in Asia. It's just showing the number of brands that are existing in Vietnam today. 1.3 billion was raised for fintech in Vietnam last year. So quite a considerable sum. And just a shout out to the unicorns in Vietnam. The first one is not in financial services, it's in gaming. But then we have Momo, VNPay, and Vinagame, which is also in gaming, Zalo Pay, and many other areas, including media. So interesting to see that we have 4 unicorns as of the end of 2021. E-wallet penetration, I'm back to my youth study, 16 to 29-year-olds is at 66%, almost the same whether they're in a village or in a town. I'm just highlighting the fact that amongst banked adults from that previous study, it's at 39%. So youth more likely to be using e-wallets, but still amongst banked adults, 39% of them are using an e-wallet. Before I move on to who's got the highest share of any wallets, which you could probably all guess, I'm going to ask another question, which is what proportion of, find the question, just 1 second. Here we go. What proportion of online shopping or e-commerce do people pay for with cash on delivery in Vietnam? Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 3 seconds. Make a guess. 3, 2, 1, you're done. Thank you very much. Sharing the results back. So most of you are saying either more than 75% or 26 to 50%. 4 years ago, it was at 95%, just to put that in perspective. And again, that same study, when we looked at youth, 64% cash on delivery. So a great advancement for the e-commerce sites in terms of money collection. Most coming though after cash from bank transfers and then e-wallets, and this is the younger end of the population, 16 to 29-year-olds, but that's a huge shift from what we saw actually back in 2019 when we did a large study on online shopping where it was over 90% cash on delivery. So that's great for the e-commerce players and creates some transaction fees for banks and e-wallets. E-wallet wise, it's very much dominated by Momo, which I'm sure you've all read about. Then Shopee Pay, which is built into Shopee's site, the largest e-commerce for consumers site, for online shopping site, shall we say. And then Zalo Pay, which of course has a huge presence with the Zalo instant messaging app, although Zalo Pay is a separate app, unfortunately. And then there's a multitude of others. There's some on the right-hand side of the screen that have less than 1 to 2%. One point to note, there were some social distancing rules in place when we did this survey. So Mocha, which is built into the Grab app, may be slightly underrepresented as people were not moving around the city so much at the time of the survey. Final point on financial inclusion, what's happened to consumer finance? So this is unsecured consumer finance loans, 67 billion. They had a big jump in non-performing loans, up to 11% in 2021. But the overall growth in loans was almost stable at just 1%. That's 18% of GDP though, and it's 40% of retail good sales. Buy now, pay later, which seems to be generating a lot of interest. Still relatively small at 500 million in 2021, but that's versus 207 million just a year earlier. So clearly a growing area that is generating a lot of interest. But the point I want to highlight is that financial inclusion is nearly universal at 70%, and digital payment supremacy is nigh, i.e. it's coming, it's not far away. The speed that cash on delivery has fallen has been quite phenomenal, and I don't see any reason why that should stop given the level of financial inclusion and some of the efforts that e-commerce are trying to themselves increase that level for good reason. I'm going to wrap up looking ahead for Vietnam. The speed of change, if you weren't in China in the 80s, you've never seen the speed of change that Vietnam is experiencing. If you were in China in the 80s, you'll draw a lot of similarities. And it's going to accelerate. So the speed of change is going to accelerate up until 2030. Vietnam keeps leapfrogging the adoption curves, if you like, as people jump into tech solutions. The most obvious example is credit card penetration is very low. E-wallet penetration is very high. Smartphone penetration is very high. Most people don't have a fixed phone. Many people have never seen one in their home. So these are good examples of leapfrogging that Vietnam continues to make. So they, don't make the assumption that the Vietnamese market will follow the adoption curves and development paths that you might see in more developed markets in the region. It's highly unlikely. And then I'm going to wrap up actually with the 10 points that I've made through the presentation anyway. So I won't read them all out, but really it's wrapping up to say these are the major drivers that are accelerating how dynamic Vietnam is and will continue to accelerate how dynamic Vietnam is. I'm losing my voice, so I'm not going to read all of those out. Hopefully I've covered them. And if I haven't covered them, I'm sure Viet Capital, and by the way, thank you Viet Capital for inviting me to speak. We'll be sending you this presentation. And if you don't get it, you can download this and many of the other documents that I've referred to at cimigo.com, and nearly all of them are free. So if it's helpful to you, please go ahead and download. And at this point, Tuan, maybe take some questions or look at any Q&A.
So first of all, thank you very much, Richard. That was a very insightful and excellent presentation. Very good data. Now we'd like to open up for Q&A. So please raise your hand, type it in Q&A as you wish. The first one I have here is, for context, how many households are there in Vietnam?
27,600,000 and some change.
Okay. And the second question is, do you see a future whereby wet markets will become a minor channel for fresh groceries and shopping, and modern trade will take over? If so, when do you think that will be?
I don't see that future in my lifetime. I think wet markets will remain an important part of the retail channel structure. It's still, up in the late 60s as its contribution to overall retail sales. And let's take an example of more developed retail markets, China, big cities in China, Singapore, Hong Kong. We still have wet markets. They still have a role to play.
Okay.
On screen is the number of households for the person who asked, just below that title there.
Excellent, thank you. I saw on one of your slides where you had the top online shopping. The top four were Shopee,
Yep.
Lazada, Facebook, and Tiki. Now,
Yep.
what about players like Mobile World, or other corporations that are hard channel, traditional retail with an online platform? How does that get accounted for?
Those omni-channels, yeah. So, I mean, they exist. I'm just showing you the top four. I mean, if you download this report, you'll see where they are at. But it's a little unfair because this is online shopping overall. If you look at online shopping for electronics, you know, someone like Taiyoi Dong is going to be doing much better. So I'm not sure we even show you that in the report. It's, we're showing you overall brands that people have used in the last month or platforms people have used in the last month. When that covers all categories, electronics isn't one of the top categories. It's an important category, but it's not one of the top in terms of frequency. So that's why it wouldn't appear in the top. It probably doesn't appear in the top 10, to be honest, but it's an important channel within electronics.
Okay. You know, we speak a lot about the modern trade chains, you know, from and you reference Bakwasan and Taiyoi frequently. In this space, branding is very important. So to you, you know, brand health and consumer reception, which brands really stand out to you? So you mentioned Taiyoi already. Are there any other ones that stick out?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Pharmacity is very strong as a brand. Vinmart is strong. They're probably the strongest. I say Vinmart, but it may soon be Winmart. But they are probably the strongest brands.
Okay, so there's commodity prices have been ridiculously volatile. You know, we have rates all over the place, inflation rising. So it's something that, you know, your chart on gasoline prices were very demonstrative of what's happening here on the ground. So given that this inflation is rising, how is consumer spending behavior changing?
Yeah, I mean, people are still getting over the shock. Let's be honest. People lost on average 30, you know, average of household income drops last year was 38%. So, you know, that means people are giving far more, they're far more thrifty, you know, value propositions, promotions, far more important for a large part of the consumer base. Premiumization has really been put on hold for many. Large purchases have been put off for many. So, you know, electronic appliances, cars, motorbikes, homes have been put off. So people are being very cautious. The biggest issue with petrol, which is why I'm really hoping the government does reduce the tax as they're discussing at the moment, is that petrol has an immediate impact on consumer confidence, because most people fill their motorbike at least once a week, if not twice a week. It's a significant part of their expenditure, and they feel it in their wallet immediately, and that impacts confidence. And, you know, we're just sort of coming out of COVID and people getting more confident again. You know, from a consumer growth point of view, the last thing we want is people to feel restrained and to go back into being a far more thrifty mode. So the impact of COVID is far greater, but it is a risk, and it's a risk of hitting consumer confidence. Consumer confidence gets hit, people get more thrifty, and they're far more cautious with their expenditure, and they'll be far more cautious in their entertainment expenditure.
Yeah, you can definitely feel and sense that on the ground, because a lot of people, you know, that topic comes up frequently. Even when I go to the pumps, before I was paying about 70K per tank, now I'm paying about 100. So that's a significant increase.
Yeah, it's a 30% increase very rapidly.
Yeah. So I really like your data on demographics. I think it's very visual effects in the sense that, okay, so if we look at the aging population, so you're looking at 2030, elderly population by 2040. So right now, you know, all is good and groovy with the economic growth rate, but at what stage do you see that our demographics won't be able to support our economy?
I think that's an assumption. I don't think it's I think it's the wrong assumption. It's not about supporting the economy, but it is going to have an impact on the dependency ratios. And the dependency ratio has been a great accelerator of change and a great contributor to our GDP growth pre-COVID and going forward. So, you know, that really is going to start biting in the mid 2030s. So, you know, for me personally, I got 10 years of operating in a market that is growing without me having to do anything. I can be a lazy ass. The market's growing. In 2035, I'm going to have to be far smarter or retired, which is what I'm hoping, to be able to grow. Because right now I can sit on my laurels and the market's growing and I grow with the market. In 2035, I'm going to have to be far smarter to be competitive and find opportunities for growth. So if maybe that answers your question.
Okay. It does, because the thing that people would say is right now we're fine, but say in 10 years time, that labor market has shrank and the elderly population has increased. Thereby the cost of labor will rise and the liabilities will rise as well.
And it's that level of elderly dependence. The other thing that I haven't talked about this time, but is, you know, housing structures are changing. Household sizes are getting smaller, i.e. less people are living in multi-generational homes than they did 10 years ago, far less. And a lot more people are apartment living than they are house living.
Right.
Not in total, but that the growth is in apartment living, not in independent house living. What does that mean for the elderly dependents? Who's going to look after them? Does your wife want her parents-in-law and your parents coming to live with her? And this is, of course, you know, most don't really want that, however nice they might wish to be. And that's going to be a societal issue that's going to really come to the fore more in the 40s when this group in the green, blue, and grey has moved up a little bit more. That's going to be putting a lot of dependent seniors, particularly those in the lower economic strata, in need of support. And that support to date has been coming from living within a multi-generational home, being looked after, being fed, etc. You know, housing structures are changing those relationships.
Right.
That's my concern.
So based on your advisory work, advisory and other work, what are you seeing in terms of private equity interest in the market, from where and what sectors?
You know, Twin, I can't answer that. I mean, it's a good question. But I don't think the base of what you know, we're a medium-sized business. I wouldn't be giving a fair view of what's going on in the market. So in terms of growth areas that get interest, it's very much digital transformation areas. It's very much healthcare, education, you know, but a lot of our work is in financial services and consumer goods and automotive. But in terms of new client spaces, it's tech, it's platform, it's education and healthcare. And a lot of those would be incorporating or hoping to incorporate a kind of new business tech orientated model. Some of them, in my view, don't solve a consumer problem, are doomed for failure. But the smart ones that do have identified and solve a consumer problem are the really interesting ones.
In your slides, I saw some two really interesting stats. So the number of millionaires went up by 218%, while the average income went down by 38%. Very contrast in stats. So
yeah, so this is quite normal in a crisis in any country. Actually, is that the high net worth individuals and beyond tend to do well because they're in a position to take advantage of opportunities. And the average Joe or man on the street, or woman on the street in this country, fare less well.
So do you think the income inequality will continue to deepen in Vietnam post-COVID?
I do. Okay. I do, yeah. As it does around the world, but yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. What are the biggest differences in consuming patterns between the youth generation, say the 16 to 29-year-olds, and the current main spending generation, the 30-plus-year-olds?
Wow, that's a wide-reaching question. Okay, so the way they are embracing the digital economy is much faster than the older generation.
Mm-hmm.
However, let's dispel the myth that seniors aren't online, because they are, and they've got smartphones, and they also use a lot of online media and shopping. But the adoption curve is much, much faster for the youth. Their interest and experience is far greater than the older generations is, who are grown up being used to ownership playing the key role. When I say experience, it means, I've posting pictures of I've been to a Thai restaurant, or I've climbed Fansipan, or in normal times I've traveled overseas, because those experiences can be shared and light, frankly, and it projects a certain lifestyle to their social network, which of course a lot of the older generation are not so interested in doing. Not all of them, but a lot of them are not so interested in doing. So it's really that 21 billion that sits in the internet economy. That's a lot of that is fueled by that, and the increase that we see there is a lot of that is fueled by the youth, or the younger end of the market, the under 30s. Mm-hmm. So that would probably be the most striking difference.
Gotcha. So this recent Omicron outbreak, do you think, is it an impact to consumer confidence? And if so, when do you think it's just going to brush over and become a flu?
Yeah, it was a huge impact on consumer confidence. Consumer confidence fell to the lowest level. I've lived here 20 years, the lowest level I've ever seen it in September 2021. The lowest level. That was middle of lockdown, towards the end of lockdown. Incomes were really stretched. A lot of people were losing their jobs or not being paid their full salary. Mm-hmm. It's come back super quickly. I mean, it's back, but it's not back to where it was in 2019. It sits 30% below. So it's come back by half, and it's coming back quite quickly. I mean, recent events, getting back to school after tech takes a lot of pressure on parents, although it probably spreads the disease a little bit more. The easier that interprovincial travel, as different provinces get aligned, takes a lot of pressure and makes people feel more confident. Anyone living in the city can feel that people are a lot more relaxed about COVID than they were even 4 weeks ago. So how long before that will come back? I believe, I see it in retail goods sales, that consumer confidence is back strongly enough there. It's in the services, entertainment, travel, and so on, that there's room for it to move back. And that's going to take until September. But I think retail sales will get back into growth territory over prior years in the middle of the year. And by September, we'll see the same in services. So we're not far away. And by the way, I was presenting last year on the impact of COVID, and I was predicting it would take 18 months to recover post-lockdown. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're in March, lockdown 1st of October finished. So it's been far quicker than I ever anticipated or forecasted.
Yeah, your chart is really good on demonstrating the pre-level in 2019 and post-level, which we're at now, which is amazing how fast it rebounded. The next question is in reference to the dairy sector. So the 0 to 14-year-old group in the demographics is getting smaller. Does that explain at least partly why the dairy sector growth dropped to single digit in the last few years?
Yeah, that's part of it, because population growth isn't what it has been in historic years. So Wiener Milk and Friesland Campina and others who sort of dominate the market were selling into a naturally growing market. They could be relatively ineffective and still grow strongly. I think there are other issues at play, and I think these companies could be far better in their innovations and making milk less feminine. I say that because it comes in a carton pack with a straw, and they could develop propositions that extend the life of liquid milk beyond 8, 9, 10, 12-year-olds, when it becomes, again, seemingly childish, partly because of the packaging. There's a lot of innovation in yogurt. There's far less innovation in the liquid milk category. So there's a lot that could be done to propel growth. But yes, you're partly right. It's much easier to win into a growing market than it is a market that's no longer. It's still growing. By the way, the population growth is just under 1% per annum. So there's still new babies being born, but the proportion of the population is dropping.
Right. In your banking brand power slides, seems to be a big shift in ranking, and MB Bank jumped to number 2. Is there a big change in consumer perception towards the bank?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, to be honest, I've only just seen the results and haven't fully explored them, but I think MB is doing a very good job on its digital transformation and some of its digital products and solutions for consumers. So I'm kind of speculating at the moment that I think that's helped them hugely. Again, this isn't purely share, it's the attitude to banks, and the banks that we think are going to have the momentum to grow strongly in the coming years because of the way they're perceived now.
Okay. How do you feel about potentially higher power costs for green energy and higher prices or more taxes to pay for this versus growing traditional energy sources? That's the first part.
Yeah, I'm not the person to ask. I'm sorry. I wish I knew more about the sector, but I don't. I would be speaking from the hip and speaking nonsense. So I'm going to skip that question. Apologies to the person who's asked it.
Oh, no worries at all. A question regarding Vinamilk, a follow-up question to what we discussed earlier. So Vinamilk growing so slowly, given there's two parts: that the market is super underpenetrated in the population. And why do you think that Vietnam is so underpenetrated compared to the rest of the region?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's underpenetrated, but if you look at the penetration of drinking milk, by the time you get to 13, 14, the chart looks like a cliff, because Vinamilk, and as the market leader, I'm going to blame them, which is slightly unfair because there are other players, of course. They haven't effectively innovated to make milk interesting to over 14-year-olds. And you look at that penetration chart, no other category drops off so suddenly at that age outside of baby products. So it's quite a staggering missed opportunity that they've had for their market leadership not to be able to successfully innovate and come up with proper propositions that compel a 16-year-old to drink a milk-based beverage or a 30-year-old to drink a milk-based beverage. So that's the issue. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am sure it's possible. I can't speak to the comparative numbers. I'm not convinced that in Malaysia, Indonesia, it isn't so dissimilar. In Thailand has done a good job extending liquid milk into older categories. But anyway, yeah, that's innovation is a real challenge, and it's the right compelling proposition, just hasn't been there or hasn't been supported. I think a lot of what Vinamilk does is block potential inbound competitors in their adult propositions rather than take them serious as a serious opportunity for growth. I invest behind them to really grow them over the longer term. I think they're blocking mechanisms. You see the same with Heineken. You'll see them launch brands but not really support them. It's just a blocking mechanism to make sure that, let's take Strongbow, that another cider doesn't enter the market with success. They'll also kind of block them and get that placeholder there, and they can dial it up if they have a competitor who's aggressive. And I think that's kind of a bit of the attitude we see in Vinamilk. One person's opinion. I don't know this as fact.
Well, we have 2 minutes left, so time for one more question. Is there such a thing as consumer preference for domestic national brands over foreign brands? So in the past, the general population always favored the national brands as being higher qualities and more expensive. Do you think brands that pursue a national pride strategy can win over the foreign brands?
National brands are winning and will continue to win more. Let's use Vinamilk as an example. They did a wonderful job over the last 15 years of changing perceptions of Vinamilk from a lower quality product into a superior product designed for a Vietnamese body, and becoming of international standards. So they left their international competition, frankly, in their tailwind. You can look at their market share. You can see it. Look what Masan's doing. You can see what they've done in their speed to market. Their product development cycles are extremely quick. They seem to be comfortable to fail and move on to the next product. You do that with a international food and beverage company. They're not very comfortable failing, and their inception to market launch might be 18 months to 24 months. Masan can do it in 3 months to 6 months, sometimes less. So they are winning. It doesn't matter whether it's retail, services, financial services, automotive. We're starting to see more. They are winning, and it would be very arrogant to say that Vietnamese consumers perceive foreign brands as being superior. It's no longer true.
Okay, so one more follow-up question to that is, Sabeco is pursuing a national price strategy in their fight against Heineken. What do you think about that? Do you think they'll succeed and overcome Heineken?
You mean a national distribution strategy?
No, as far as really branding national pride, that Sabeco and their beers are all for the Vietnamese people, made by Vietnamese for the Vietnamese.
Yes, I think they'll be very successful, honestly, because it's a smaller market, but just look at what happened with Cambodia, the beer brand in Cambodia. I mean, within a matter of 5 years, it moved from a new entrant to by far the market leader. And the prior to that, people thought that Angkor, not Anchor, Angkor as in Angkor Wat, was the national brand, although it was actually owned by Carlsberg. But and did well playing to that card, but Cambodia came in and did extraordinarily well and knocked them off the top place by a long way. It's a very national branding is a very common strategy in beer, and it is invariably very successful. So I would be 100% behind Sabeco's plans there.
Excellent. And well, we have one more question if you have time.
I do.
What is your view in the competition between Bạc Qua San and Win Commerce? Who will win in the long run, in your opinion?
I guess they're both taking a different approach, right? So Bạc Qua San and Tay Hoi Đi Dong, Mobile World, they're a formidable retailer. I mean, I'm looking forward. I think they're presenting tomorrow on some of the tech they use in their retail outlets. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. They have formidable experience. They're very good at iterating trial and error to turn their stores into profit centers. Formidable. Masan, Winmart stores, they're going to really benefit from getting distribution points for their brands. So, if I go back to my home country in the UK, own brands are a challenge to a branded world, right? Supermarket own brands. Well, Masan have taken that on. They're going to have their own distribution points, and their model is very different to Bạc Qua San. So I think there's room for them both to be successful. I think Bạc Qua San is a better retail operator than Winmart is today, but I think Winmart is also trying some very clever ideas in the way they're combining different brands and single outlets. And of course, that vertical integration they have of the ability to launch new products and suddenly have all those distribution points, no listing fees, and trial and error and market research for testing those new products that they bring to market. So different models, I think they'll both be very successful. I would put money behind both of them.
Fantastic. And we concur at VietCap that the country is big enough to accommodate for two major players. With that said, thank you very much, Richard, for your insights. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tuan. Thanks for hosting as well.
Rồi, chào anh.